Welcome to the 4th edition of Counter Sessions. Counter Session is a format of events that we started last summer. I'm sorry, my voice is going a bit funny. It's that persistent cough that's been going around, I think. So Counter Session is a format that we started last summer. And with the idea of having everything kind of being over the counter, literally counter, culture counter, over the counter as in the bar counter, and creating a format of events, more of talks, presentations, panels, etc., within kind of a more of an informal setting where everything kind of happens in and around that bar. And it's kind of with the idea that this is becoming more of an interactive space of talking, discussing, exchanging, connecting, during the talk and also afterwards. And the bar setting actually comes with a history. It's Flipper Bar, like you see here, the name in the window. It's a bar that myself and Jens, who's hiding behind the shell, ran in the very same building more than 20 years ago. So the kind of wild years of Berlin. And we were just running this illegal bar and have it open. We had it open just one day a week, and we're just kind of, gather friends and people, whoever. And so it's a bit of a tribute to that. And the curtain is in fact literally a relic from that time. So this is was hanging in the street 22 years ago, almost in the same spot. And for the 4th counter session, now we're invited and we are welcoming Mindy here. We will present her a very impressive Cyberfeminism Index. And a few words about Mindy. Mindy is a designer and technologist based in New York City, currently teaching as an assistant professor at Rutgers Mason Gross School of the Arts and is also a critic at Yale School of Art. Her expanded practice involves archival projects, techno-critical writing, performative lectures, design commissions, and close collaborations. Mindy's ongoing Cyberfeminism Index, which gathers 3 decades of online activism and net art, was commissioned by Rhizome and presented at the New Museum in its online form, and its print form is a recipient of the Graham Foundation grants. And Mindy has now literally been on a world tour with Cyberfeminism Index. How many?
I'm really not sure, but there is, you can see it all on the tour site, cyberfeminismindex.com. Yeah.
And I'm so grateful you're making your stop here. This is really, really amazing. I'm so happy. And I've really been really impressed by your work for kind of 2 reasons. I mean, one, your role, and we just talked about this before, being a designer, being interested in technology, being interested in research, kind of finding a way to combine all of these things is very much kind of the spirit of A to Z and what we try to kind of explore here, like how can we expand that idea of graphic design. So I think that's very much what you also live and have a very particular role that we play that. And I'm also really appreciate the Cyberfeminism Index because it kind of also looks at what came before. And I think this is also, it's so important to kind of be aware of whose shoulders we're standing on, what's been done before, what's the context of what we are doing now, and how we can also really take inspiration and ideas from that context of work that's been done before. And it's so rich. I mean, I've just been keeping through the last couple of days. It's so rich of pointers and ideas and things, and even though it seems to have such a concise format, it's literally spilling out in all directions, I feel. It's very inspiring. And the book is available after the talk. You can come to me. We have 10 copies. And it's going to be an auction. Exactly. They're €30 or more. And we are grateful for Burkhard Radmeder who managed to get the books, which wasn't actually that easy here in Europe yet. It's so fresh, and they've really been great in making sure at least we have 10 copies here today. And So after the talk will be around 40 minutes, we said, 40 minutes. There'll be time for questions and discussions. So as I said, that's very much also the idea of this evening. And it will be followed by drinks at the bar. So afterwards, after the talk, the flipper bar will be running with its very traditional, always the same. It's always Concept beer, water, and caipirinha. So, that's the thing. And the bar is on a suggested donation basis. And tonight we've decided to, I think we've all been very shaken by what's happened in Syria and in Turkey and with the suffering of the earthquakes. And we said all the proceedings of the bar tonight will donate to Médecins Sans Frontières and their work in Turkey and Syria. So drink gently. And before I hand over to Mindy, I just want to thank everybody who's helping, who's involved here always. I want to thank Eva, who's actually pointed out Mindy's work to me in the first place. Down there. I want to thank Soraya, our guest bartender. She's doing the best caipirinhas, as always. Don't miss them. I guess it's also the best way to get rid of the Berlin winter blues. It's a really good caipirinha. And after the talk, after we finish that, before the bar starts, I'd just like to ask you to maybe quickly put the stools together and put it to the side so we have enough space for the bar. And last thing is, I would like to invite you all. You probably know our wall, some of you might already know it, which is our personal collection of all the visitors. It's almost like a visualization of our community here. And I'd like to invite you all. There's stickers are there on the bar, the green ones, to write your name on and stick it on the wall. And now I all wish you a super inspiring evening.
Thank you.
And welcome, Mindy.
Thank you so much.
Super warm welcome. So, you can either sit on cushions right here in the front, or you just go there in the back. And ladies sit there. Maybe that's easier.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so sorry to be in. You have a really front row seat, so I hope I'm not spittling on you. But thank you so much, Anya, for the introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's my first time at A to Z, so it's really exciting to kind of see a design hub here in Berlin. So what you see behind me in front of you is the Cyberfeminism Index. So this book is a source book. It's a chronology that's annotated. And it's also a collection of online activism and net art from the past 3 decades, 1991 to present. And we'll talk about why that date is important. It's also structured as an index of indexes. And I'll walk through what that means as well. But before we get into the structure of the book, we might ask, what is cyberfeminism? This camera focus might go in and out, so there it is. So by nature, this term has been left pretty open. This was partly because it was permeating quite naturally, and they wanted people to be able to resonate with this term based on what they saw other people doing, and then see if they could self-identify, allowing the term to constantly mutate. So I actually define this by breaking apart the word itself. This prefix cyber first emerged in cybernetics in the 1940s by Norbert Wiener. Is anyone familiar with this field of study, cybernetics? So in the most simple one-liner, it's this idea that not only do you impact a system, that system is also impacting you. So you're in this feedback loop of behavioral change. Cyber first then emerged in cyberspace in the 1980s in the science fiction novel Neuromancer by William Gibson. Have people read this book? So Neuromancer is important because it kind of predicted a lot of the sensory networked online landscapes that we're very much talking about today. Think metaverse, virtual reality, etc. But when it's also very characterized by the male gaze. So Gibson's cyberspace had fembots, cyberbabes, depictions of women in typically robotic or assistant-like roles. So when cyber was then fixed to feminism in 1991, this was done by two distinct groups, unbeknownst to the other. So the first, you have the Australian art collective VNS Matrix, and then you had the British cultural theorist Sadie Plant. So by bringing together these seemingly disparate word parts, it almost becomes an oxymoron or a provocation. How can women in marginalized communities kind of predict or shape what cyberspace might be? And this ranged from techno-utopia to techno-dystopia and all the blurriness in between. So we'll see a lot of examples of that in this book. So the sticker, though, comes from the website of the Old Boys Network. This is their website from 1997. The sticker itself is from the webpage of Helene von Oldenburg. And in it, she was interviewing the public about their opinion of cyberfeminism. So at the time, it was met with a lot of confusion, and perhaps still is today. But ultimately, they still left that term undefined. So the Old Boys Network never gave a concise definition. They instead gave the 100 Antitheses Manifesto. This was in 1997. So here they gave 100 reasons that were playful, poetic, and multilingual of all the things that cyberfeminism was not, in the attempt to be more inclusive and adaptable. This book is also the hard copy of a soft copy called the Cyberfeminismindex.com. So this website first came out in 2020. It was commissioned by Rhizome and made in collaboration with Angela Meitzler, Janine Rosen, Charles Bruskowski. And it really serves as the living complement to the index that you see here. So that looked something like this, and we'll talk about this a bit more. But this website is really attempting to continue to be a living document. There's a light green button at the bottom where you're able to crowdsource entries. So if you see something tonight that resonates with your own work, that feels something similar to your peers or something historical, feel free to submit. So this book then, even if books have the connotation of being finite and immutable and reputable, it's actually trying to feel like a snapshot or a document of a moment of the mutation of the website, which will kind of go on in perpetuity. As you can see, my book is really rough. It's kind of falling apart, but I think that's actually quite nice because it shows the lack of preciousness we're trying to show with this, especially with the design of the book and the page quality and etc. So this book is also an interface, and it's filled with hyperlinks. And typically when we hear the word interface or hyperlink, we have a digital connotation. But a lot of their precursors were in fact analog. So things like indexes, bibliographies, footnotes, citations, these are all examples of analog hyperlinks. So in entry 146, Cyberfeminism, Connectivity, Critique, and Creativity, they actually, in their editor's notes, call this a hypertextual link. And then throughout the book's pages in the margin, you'll see these eye icons that kind of push and pull you to different parts of the book in the nonlinear way that have complementary or juxtaposed themes. So again, it's really trying to show this indexing, or a term I just learned, exdexing, of this nonlinearity and interconnectivity. In this book, our cross-references look like pills. So in each of these excerpts, you have these green pills that allow you to jump to things that are related or contradictory or intentionally critical of what you're reading. So if you were to follow a hyperlink trail in this book, that might read something like this. Cyberfeminism is a mutating word with a nebulous history. Its evolution is less a single root system with multiple branches than a network of entangled rhizomes, constantly and multidirectionally moving. Virginia Barrett of the Australian art collective VNS Matrix has described cyberfeminism as anti-genealogical, anti-authorial, and a hostile mucus, never faithful to any origins. Cross-reference 8. VNS Matrix, 1991. The most consistent VNS Matrix genesis story is that VNS Matrix crawled out of the cyber swamp in the particularly hot summer of 1991, and via an aesthetics of slime initially generated as porn, by women, for women. VNS Matrix forged an unholy alliance with technology and its machines, and spewed forth a blasphemous text which was the birth of cyberfeminism. VNS Matrix was on a mission to hijack the toys from techno-cowboys and remap cyberculture with a feminist bent. This is one story. There are also stories about a slime consciousness operating via spiral space. Cross-reference 181. 181, Tales from the Puppet Mistress, Gash Girl, 2000. Years after losing my machine virginity to a Mac 512K, I have slipped through the reality grid into the clear, violent haze of spiral space. Desire, I slide through the luminous screen to inhabit the spaces between words. The keyboard is constantly sticky. Madness, an erotically reconstructed a replicant, my biocode is being rewritten. This is better than any drug. Cross-reference 646. Discortizadora, Ripper. Mestiza of the southern pussy, meat of a pussy that expels word vomit, conserved by death and disgust of the colonization representing an ancestral systemic violation in live meat. I do not feel pride because I was born full of prejudices. No Man's Land, cross-reference 95. Confessions of a Webback, 1997. You call yourself a webback. Do you see yourself as an intruder on the net? Yes, the number of Latino students, artists, and activists on the net is minute. But we want to participate in the national and cultural debates, and many are permeated by technology. I consider myself a coyote, a smuggler of ideas. We want net inhabitants to get used to a new cultural sensibility, but we do encounter the linguistic border patrol. So as you're seeing here, the section we're in now is what we call the index or the primary index. So it feels pretty similar to an encyclopedia. And just like you wouldn't read an encyclopedia cover to cover, with this book, you might open it at random, see an entry that resonates with you, and then jump to related things throughout the book using these cross-references. Each cross-reference is used at least once. Every entry is cited or cross-referenced. So in theory, you could get through the book just by kind of going through this hyperlink trail, but you can also create your own pathways. If you want a guided tour, there's also these collections. So here I asked various artists, activists, scholars, and collectives to create a theme. Things like body modification, Latin American hack feministas, sonic cyberfeminism, and select 10 to 20 entries in this book related to that theme. So here, you can go down their list of selections to kind of get an entry point into their selected field of study. If you're looking for something specific, there's also an index of titles, as well as an index of people. This happens It's very sensitive to lighting. Let's see if it snaps back. There it goes. And if you want a more serendipitous discovery, there's also an index of images. Let's snap it again. Okay, there we go. All New Gen, VNS Matrix, 1992. Sabotage the databanks of Big Daddy mainframe. Your guides through the contested zone are renegade DNA sluts. The most wicked is Circuit Boy, a dangerous techno-bimbo. Be prepared to question your gendered construction. Genital Panic, Merry Magic, 2020. We must reconsider the normative body and how disobedient bodies are already pathologized, from the medicalization of infants born of ambiguous genitalia to the disqualification of intersex athletes on the basis of biology. These guidelines matter. They determine how we are policed and how we are surveilled. The Black Trans Archive, Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, 2020. Welcome to the Pro-Black, Pro-Trans Archive. This interactive archive was made to store and center Black trans people, to preserve our experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, our lives, to remember us even when we are at risk of being erased. So when you first come to this website, just online, you have three options. The first is if you are Black and trans. The second is if you're trans. And the third is if you're cis. So depending on your selection, you would actually have a limited access into the contents of this online space. IKU, Shuli Chang, 2000. This is not love. This is sex. IKU is a porn film that takes up where Blade Runner left off. I'm assuming most people in here have seen Blade Runner. The internet porn enterprise Genome Corporation has taken over and dispatched IKU coders to collect orgasm data, developing the ability to sell profitable and addictive on-demand orgasms. So in Shuli Chang science fiction, there is no longer fiscal currency. There's no longer cash. So what they do instead is use orgasm data as their new currency, and they kind of hire these bots to go and mine this and then use them in society. IKU came out in 2000. Shuli Chang just released UKI, and that tagline is, "This is not sex, this is love." So she's kind of continuing this trail. But that website is coming out, I think, this month. It's also kind of a feature film, so you're also able to see this in theaters. Time Traveler, Skawanati, 2008. This is a website from the future. Watch for upcoming episodes in which Hunter Deerhouse sails to Europe with Pocahontas in AD 1615, aids and abets the Dakota Sioux Uprising of 1862, and finds true love in the Kanawake Mohawk Territory in 2009. So what you're seeing here is a machinima. A machinima is a portmanteau of machine and cinema. These were essentially live action plays that happened in video games and then were recorded, and the documentation ended up becoming video art pieces. Skawanati is also considered largely the first Indigenous net artist, has always been based in Montreal. And you can watch all 6 episodes of Time Traveler on her website. They're all live now. Afro Cyber Resistance, Tabitha Rezaire, 2014. We need to quickly snap out of the Web 2.0 fantasy of the internet as a promised land. Whatever visions that ideologically shaped this technology at the beginning of the development of computers have now successfully been structurally organized to serve the primary interests of North American governmental bodies and the commercial interests of the world's wealthiest companies. The Bitch Mutant Manifesto, VNS Matrix, 1996. Your fingers probe my neural network. The tingling sensation in the tips of your fingers are my synapses responding to your touch. It's not chemistry, it's electric. Don't ever stop fingering my separating holes, extending my oozing boundary. But in spiral space, there is no they. There is only us. Suck my code. Daddy Residency, Nahi Kim, 2019. I plan to have a baby after 7 years by artificial insemination, and I'd like to have a variety of companions for that rigorous but invaluable parenting experience. So I'm launching this open call for daddy residents who want to raise the baby with me for a certain amount of time. The application deadline is July 31st, 2025. So all of you can still apply to become Nahi's baby daddy. And the Old Boys Network. It's a little fickle, there it is. The Old Boys Network is regarded as the first international cyberfeminist alliance. Normally, the term Old Boys Network is used as a metaphor to describe an informal interrelation of men. Nowadays, the Old Boys Network may be used for a dangerous cyberfeminist virus. So because we are in a design gallery, I wanted to walk through how this project and its various containers have taken form. So, when I first began this process, I scraped the bibliographies of a lot of academic articles, including a cyborg manifesto. This was first published in 1985, but then was republished in an essay anthology in 1991. The thing with reading and the bibliographies of academic articles is typically it leads to more academic articles. And while Donna Haraway was actually quite good about branching out the types of theorists that she was referring to, it wasn't bridging too much some of the practice-oriented things that I was looking for this specific aggregation. And then I learned about the New Women's Survival Catalog. So there's actually a great article about this written by Meg Miller, who's in this room. But this was a 1973 publication by Susan Rennie and Kirsten Grimstad. It was billed as the Feminist Whole Earth Catalog. It was a New York Times bestseller. There were only 2 issues. But typically we hear much more about the Whole Earth Catalog. This had many more issues. It's kind of billed as Google before Google, aka by Steve Jobs. It's really become like a playbook for a lot of the tech CEOs that you see. And it was also very much pioneering this countercultural movement that led to a lot of cyberculture development in Silicon Valley. Then for this catalog, though, when Grimstad and Rennie were starting this bibliography, their advisor told them that a revolution could not happen within an institution, that they had to go grassroots. So they got in a car And they drove across the United States to Los Angeles, along the way interviewing and collecting references of feminist bookstores, resources for those who wanted to get divorced, resources for sexual assault survivors, etc. And it's kind of become this really beautiful document of second wave feminism in the US. So my version of the road trip was the phone call. I spoke with a lot of different people for this book, and they essentially gave me a lot of references, artists, theorists, practices, who would then in turn referred me to others. So in entry 244, one of the people I spoke with was Judy Malloy. Judy Malloy is regarded as a very early hypertext fiction author. So she was making a lot of static websites that kind of had this choose your own adventure quality with these interlinked pages. And she also made a compendium of women in media art called Women, Art, and Technology. The biggest takeaway from Judy Malloy, which I write about in this editor's note, is this blend between yak and hack, her words. Yak was like yak, 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 talking, or theory, whereas hack was practice, this act of making, and how both of these things are very entangled, and you can't really have one successfully without the other. So you'll see that distinction here in the first container of this project, which was this open access, open source, crowdsourced spreadsheet. So at the top, you can see yak and hack in purple. In blue, you can see all of the categories like glitch, floss, free libre, open source software, body modification, etc. And in the green, you see all of the media types. So these are things like syllabi, artworks, manifestos, etc. As you kind of scroll through, even if you don't look at the author, date, and title on the left, you'll see that these things don't fit very neatly into singular categories, that they often require checking multiple things in different columns. And this is precisely because these spreadsheets are on a two-dimensional axis, X and Y, with predetermined categories. So it doesn't really allow for the fluidity of things in between categories, or even the ability for people to self-identify how they want their work to be seen or how it might be situated. So what I did after this was look into some other examples. So this is Ted Nelson. He is considered the father of the concept of the hyperlink or hypertext. He coined a lot of words like intertwinkled and rectangularity, which I will get into. But here he is kind of talking about his new three-dimensional spreadsheet tool called Zigzag. It never really took off. But what's important about this is when spreadsheets first came out, they were considered liberatory technologies. So anyone with access to a spreadsheet and a personal computer could start to do some fairly complex computations online. However, quote, conventional data structures, especially tables and arrays, are confined structures created from a rigid top-down specification that enforces regularity and rectangularity. That's a quote by Ted Nelson in this presentation of Zigzag. So on the screen behind you, you can see him zooming into this three-dimensional spreadsheet tool that was trying to create a regular system for the irregular. And a contrast to the rectangularity that you see in a lot of these two-dimensional tools. So here he's demonstrating how it's used for like the lineage of the royal family in the UK, but the content doesn't really matter. It's essentially you can add a cell to an existing cell to allow this natural branching effect rather than giving a binary and forcing people to pick between predetermined options. So just a quick note that, as mentioned, Ted Nelson did coin a lot of terms. So hypertext, hyperlink, intertwinkled, rectangularity, and also teledildonic. So this term is essentially a remote-controlled vibrator, telephone, telepath, and also dildo. So by bringing together these things, an example of that is this icon. So this is an icon from buttplug.io. It's a butt plug, but all of the tendrils are different ports of different cables, implying that you can attach it to many devices. But it's also an open source service that you can use to basically create your own sex toys. So you can visit buttplug.io if you're curious in this kind of thing. Okay. So for the second container after the spreadsheet, my primary collaborator, Angeline Meitzler, and I were thinking about two primary questions. How do we visualize citations? And how do websites age? Is it possible to future-proof a website? And this book and the website is filled with a lot of examples of websites from 1991 to present. And many of those are degraded and lead to link rot or bit rot. One of our references was the 100 Antitheses, which I mentioned before with the Old Boys Network. So if you go to this site, they have changed the URL, but the site works perfectly, even though it was developed in 1997. And we can kind of guess why that might be. It's using a lot of system defaults. It was hard-coded by Cornelia Solfrank, so it's only using static static pages. It's not using any third-party JavaScript libraries, no new tech, like it wasn't using Flash. So it actually feels quite durable. So some of the defaults that they're using is CSS Blue. HTML and CSS are kind of the backbones of the internet, or websites. It's using your list items like header 1, header 2 list items. It's also using Arial, which is a system font that you can find across all computers. And it's also one of the few system fonts that was co-designed by a woman, Patricia Saunders for IBM in the early 80s. That's why we're also using Arial throughout this book and on the website. And up at the top, it's kind of fast, but they're using, if you look at the black one here, this is a form field called a dropdown. So if you just wrap text with the dropdown tag, it will style like that. So this is how the browser is styling that form element. So for our website, we tried to learn from this. You have this green blur that snaps to what appears to be a fairly standard table, but upon interacting with the site, this table is made to feel unusual. So you have this green blur, you can select different entries that open drawers, and it's also added to the side panel, which we call the learning trail that you can download. So while there are only 10 copies here, you can, in theory, go to the website and select every entry and print out your own version. Because the website is a living index, whereas this one is static, because of publishing deadlines, the manuscripts that we froze from the website at the time was in early 2021. And in the 2.5 years that the manuscript has taken to be edited, there's already 300 new entries on the website. So the website has around 1,000, and this book has 703. So it's also a nice way to kind of show how quickly people are adding entries to this. I also want to note that the average lifespan of a website, according to the Internet Archive, is 2.5 years, which is quite short. So according to that, our site would already be down because it was launched 2.5 years ago. So we've done our best to try to develop a system where it could stay online using these defaults, not using third-party JavaScript libraries, etc. But also, while maintaining the server and the URL, kind of taking an oath of maintenance to try to keep this online for as long as possible. And part of that's possible because we've partnered with Rhizome, who will include it in ArtBase, which is kind of their interconnected database for as many museum collections in the world. Right now, it's starting with those in New York, but in theory, you could search Shu Li Cheng at the Met, and if there's any works in any other museum, those would also appear. So it's a nice way to kind of create this quote-unquote global or more wide-ranging library. So I also wanted to talk about this final container, this book. So how did we get here? I was working with Laura Combs, a good friend of mine and a designer, and also Lily Healy, who's a designer and developer. We wanted to create a seamless workflow from the website to the book. And it was not seamless at all, but I'll show you how we did it, because we did script a lot of this. So I'll start with this index page. There are these larger images in the front, but in the back, you'll see these thumbnails and these captions. So what we first did is when we downloaded everything, we imported it all into Google Drive. This is the spreadsheet. The numbers that you're seeing relate to the entry in the primary index, and the letter is all the different images related to that entry. So we had to manually rename all of these images, but the captions luckily didn't have to be edited so much. But you'll see how this is then uploaded into the image index. So this is what appears to be a blank InDesign template. The cursor that you see is Lily's. And using that spreadsheet of captions and numbers and that corresponding Google Drive folder of images connected to those numbers, she is importing both of these, and you'll see how it populates the spreads. So this, I don't know how long the image index is, maybe 50 pages. So this was able to populate 50 pages almost immediately, but every time there's an error, instead of just fixing that one image, it's actually faster to just re-script the entire thing because it's so fast. So the pills are using object styles. That wasn't quite working, had to be re-scripted. The images are all different sizes, so fitting it to the correct height or width, depending on what the longest edge was, had to take a few scripting errors, trials. So this was not so bad. But you can kind of see the tension here between technology and manual labor. The harder part was this. So this is about 400 pages of the book. Let me go to a spread that has a date. So first, Laura created a series of templates for every single page style that you see in this book. So things like the other indexes, the pull quote pages, see where that is. And then these primary index pages. Each of those were scripted separately and then spliced into each other. So when we downloaded the website, we ported it into Google Docs and color-coded the entire thing. So we have red titles, green metadata, and blue annotations. This was edited for months by me and Andrew Scheinman. The Google Doc itself is like 360 pages. And you can see Lily exporting this as an XML. So again, we have this seemingly blank InDesign template, but everything's been pre-tagged with paragraph styles, character styles, and object styles. So as Lily imports the XML, she'll drag it in a second. It appears to magically populate 403 pages. So again, it would have been great if it was just that and we were done, but because we have cascading columns, which means the column that you see on page 1 is connected to the column that you see on page 403, every time we typeset something, so made a hard break, got rid of a widow, inserted a thumbnail, inserted a caption, it would push all the other columns. So this actually took a lot of typesetting too, months after. So even though the workflow wasn't as seamless as we wanted, I think it's still nice to kind of show this blend between technology, these technological workflows, and the manual labor that supports them that's often invisible. I think moving forward, we'd love to create a system using print CSS, which is like a media query of CSS, where you can press print on the website and it generates pages. We do have styling for that on the current site, but it doesn't have like the columns or details that this typeset book has. So eventually we'll get there. But bandwidth and time. And finally, I wanted to talk about the images. So the images throughout the book are very low res, crunchy. There are different strategies for how you represent digital media in printed form. So what I consider kind of the unofficial sister book of this is the Rhizome's Net Art Anthology, which I believe came out in 2019. It's also a very big green book, designed by Jiminy Ha and I'm forgetting the name of the other person involved. But in the Net Art Anthology, Dragan Espenshid, who is the digital preservation director at Rhizome, opened up every single web page. If it was dead, he has different emulation environments on his computer. So he's able to select which software, which era of Mac, etc., open it up to that resolution, and then he would drag that onto a 4K external monitor and take a screenshot. So the images in the Net Art Anthology are like pixel perfect and a much higher resolution than you'd actually find on the screen. On the one hand, we didn't really have the bandwidth for this, but on the other hand, Laura and I really liked this crunchiness. Like for us, this represented and gave a little like media archaeological hint as to where this came from. So we wanted to maintain the crunchiness, the pixelation, the blurriness, etc. So you see that throughout this book. A lot of these images are quite rough. So we did work with Marietta Morink to color correct the images, but we didn't change the size of anything. So some of these images, let's see if I can find one quickly. This hand, this image is from a net art piece called Consent Clinic. It's very low res. You can see that the original image had a pink background because you see this like pink residue. This image is about 100 kilobytes. So by stretching it to this size and then also printing it at 300 DPI for print, we really exaggerate this kind of like pixelation that you see. But for us, this was actually like a really beautiful residue and that texture we wanted to keep. And another example of that is this artifact. Let me get this to snap again. So this artifact was from this website by Darkcore, by the artist Gash Girl, aka Francesca De Rimini, from 1993. I'm using Target, so I can't really show you. Let me try to hide it. This one, I'll tell you how the targets work too. Okay, yeah, let's see. So this image, while created in 1993, is, you can see it in the video, is actually quite high res for 1993. It shows the male symbol and the female symbol circling into each other, rendered in gold and silver, and three-dimensional. So we've kind of selected this as kind of the unofficial symbol of this project because it really shows this entanglement of genders that we're really grappling with. It shows the high fidelity and the technological potential, even in these early years, and that's how informed what we're doing today. And also this blend between man and machine, and how we can also start to consider our bodies as technologies in a way. Is there anything else? Oh, and generally, this pixelation is nice too because there's a whole genre of cyberfeminism called glitch feminism by Legacy Russell. So embracing the glitch, embracing the error has kind of been an ethos that runs throughout this entire project. I think with that, I will end with the acknowledgements. So the acknowledgements are here. This is a title sequence. Typically, these are reserved for films, but it goes to show the huge network of people that made this project possible. So not only the people for the production of the book, like designers, editors, publishers, etc., but also the people who contributed for the interior, so the forewords, afterwards, and collections. It's kind of jumping. But most importantly, the people who developed the crowdsourcing. So the referred by are those that I talked to over the phone. And the submitted by are all of the people that submitted entries to the website over the past 4 years. And this, of course, is ongoing now. Throughout the book, in the entry, in the metadata, right under the title, you'll see these names. So it's kind of a nice way to show the world of people that made this other internal collapsed world happen. So I wanted to close by talking about this. There was a lot of thoughts about if my name should be on this cover or if it should be prominent on this book, especially because it's a crowdsourced index. And what we decided was, by making sure it has my name attached, sure, maybe it's part of the celebration, but it also means people have someone to blame, because this book shows a highly subjective, biased history of cyberfeminism, a history moderated by me and some other stewards, but primarily through the rules that I created. And a history is different from the history. So a lot of the other early cyberfeminist collections that I was referring to were kind of attached to institutions like Rutgers Feminist Art Program, but it didn't have names attached. So it was almost presented as this objective truth. So I think this kind of shows that this is one version of a cyberfeminist arc across 3 decades. But that doesn't mean that this would align with what you might create or what some others have created. So I think with that, I'll end and we can go into some questions. Thank you so much.
Actually, I would like to start with a question that actually relates to it relates to what you just said at the end. Sorry, what was that? No, I have the advantage of already having seen the book and having spent some time with it. And there's once, what I really like what you also talked about is there's so many different entries into the book, via images, via title, via people, via the entries. And there's one category also in the book that I thought was particularly interesting, is what you call collections.
Yeah.
And you've asked us, I think, 14 artists, curators, scholars, researchers to kind of make a selection, kind of create their own personal reading of the Cyberfeminism Index. And I thought that was very interesting. So there's the angle,
here.
Exactly. There's the angle art, there's the angle technology, there's the angle, cultural background. It's a really interesting, different readings of the same image. And looking at that, I was getting really curious, what would your collection be? What would be your angle? What did you take from it that would be your personal reading of the index?
Yeah, it's interesting because the people who created these, I kind of prompted them to go in certain directions just because their current body of work or research. There are some collections on the current site that don't have a byline, and those were the ones that I was creating. So there's one, for example, called Feminist Servers, and this takes a literal and a technological approach. So some of them are servers hosted and maintained by different collectives like Anarcha server, Sister server, etc. But also talks about the history of serving and this maintenance quality that is often rendered invisible. So there's a lot of examples also in there of invisible labor, of these formerly assistant-like roles who are servicing these larger industries or platforms. So that's one example, but I do think that generally it's quite subjective. Like, I kind of like going through this hyperlink trail on my own on the site, because you really are able to create completely different collections, even if you're thinking about the same term. So while I could do a keyword search and find glitch, and you'd see all the entries populated with that word, there's also things that you can kind of fit subjectively into those categories as well. So it really depends on like what I'm trying to discover anew at that moment. So yeah, there's a variety. There's a lot of different versions that might take. Thanks, Anya. Any questions from the group?
I was wondering, you spoke about the technological maintenance of the website, and I was wondering if there's also an editorial maintainment or maintenance.
Yes. So, as mentioned, since this book manuscript was locked, 300 others have been added. What's really great about these types of physical and social gatherings is that typically after these events, I'll have like 5 to 10 new submissions on the website. So it feels like a very social way of material gathering, of extending out this collection, which is really what the goal was. Because it's meant to be living, it's meant to be growing. So that said, eventually we'll create a workflow where once you submit, it'll kind of go into the site. But right now, when you submit, it goes into a spreadsheet that I review. And the form for the submissions is quite loose. Like, you add a date, you add an author, you add a title. But the curation of like what images are selected, the captions, the excerpt, these are all things that I actively find. So even if someone puts in a project of their own, they don't necessarily know like what text or representation it will be in the book. So that is a form of long-term maintenance. I'll also say we're specifically using the word index here because some people call this an archive, the website or the book. But archives, the capital A, have a system of preservation of generational transfer. So even without the one person maintaining it, there's a support system that will allow it to live on in posterity, even after that person has passed. This book and project does not have that. It also doesn't contain complete bodies of work. An index I see as a finding aid. So this is essentially like an annotated bibliography, but none of these things are listed in full. They're essentially block quotes, and we give as much metadata as possible so you can find it. But even on the website with these entries and live links, they're basically references for things that you find elsewhere. So that's why we call it an anti-canon, because it's always pointing outward. What we do try to do is fortify the external links. So for example, if it's a PDF off JSTOR or whatever, I'll download it and link to that. Or if it's live text, I'll save it as a PDF and link to that. If it's a dead website, I'll link to Internet Archive or Rhizome's Conifer. If it's a live site, I'll monitor it to see if it goes down, and then I'll link to the other thing. So there's the different channels there where those things do feel more fortified, but generally this is an index of external sources intentionally. So that also kind of helps with like this constant flow of information. But those external links do have to be maintained also. Yeah.
Hearing you say that made me wonder, are you planning on, I know you just published this one, but are you planning on publishing future editions that also update with the website? Or are you thinking of the website as the opening archive and the book as this edition?
So there's like a conceptual and a more logistical answer for this. printing a book is like buying a small car. Like, it's not cheap. One of the things that Inventory Press and I talked about, which is here, is if we're going to print a book legitimately, like with an ISBN and etc., it needs to be part of the Library of Congress. And because printed books have the ability to reshape history in a way. So all of these things that you typically don't have many secondary sources about, now this is inside some sort of structure that is validating it by these institutional means. However, I don't know if it makes sense to print another book. I think what I'd rather do is make the print CSS on the website way more robust, and maybe even have like a select all, so people can kind of print their own using like a print on demand service. I think this book is actually quite affordable too. This is also why we went with Inventory Press, to make sure it felt like a affordable source book, not like a fight-in copy table book. But then people can really customize this for what they want, and then every reprint in some ways could be like a new document or snapshot. So that's what I'm thinking right now. But technically this book has also been out for a month and a half, so I have to figure out like what the best avenue is. So we'll see. Yeah.
I have a question. What about entries that are in languages you don't understand? Do you translate?
Yes. So I mean, right
So
here.
in Spanish.
Yeah, there's a lot in Spanish. So the way the languages work is, if it was submitted in a different language, that's first, even the title. And then if it needs to be translated, that always comes after. This kind of brings me to the question of syntax. So cyberfeminism, in the intro, I write that it's a very porous, nebulous, imperfect umbrella term. It also feels kind of retrograde, like in the 90s. When I was looking up cyberfeminism in other regions, I wasn't finding that much, and I realized it's because they use different words. So in Korea, they use the word netfemi. And in Latin America, they use the phrase hack feministas. So when you search under that word, you find much more. But what I actually was able to do was have kind of like stewards in different regions, aggregate more entries in that language, and then translate them. So in Korea, we're working with Femi Dang Dang, which is a collective. In Mexico City, we have Cyber Girls. So that was a really helpful way to pull in these different languages. For those that didn't really have a steward, like we have some in Russian, we asked friends who spoke and read the language to not only translate it, but also to typeset it. So we asked like Sasha or Alexander Tochilovsky from the Herb Lubalin Center to help us typeset some of these, because we just could not figure out the right way to break these words. So it did feel like a kind of DIY grassroots form-up translation. We didn't hire like a professional translator. We cannot figure out how we might translate this entire book, because it does, I mean, I'm also speaking English here. It's because of like my very Western bias, the majority of this is in English. So we're trying to figure out if we can figure out like a proper translation device for the website. So you can like pick Spanish and everything translates to Spanish. But the only way to do that right now is using machine learning or AI, and it's not very good. It doesn't capture, like, translation is an art. So trying to capture like the punchiness of some of the language is tricky. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like. But these are kind of all ongoing threads that we'll eventually add in. Yeah.
And you talked about the font already, Arial, and I was wondering if you also have backstory on the color that you chose for
the green. I wish the green was more conceptual, but so
To match the bar.
yeah, to match the bar. It's kind of nice because it's really become like the color of this tour in some ways. There are legacies of green in the history of computing. So most predominantly is terminal. So commands line is technically green on black. There's a great essay by Maxwell Neely Cohen about internet green on Essence. where he talks about the different influences of green throughout internet culture and how it's become really popular today. It's also interesting how green doesn't translate very well into print. So all these internet books that are in green, like the Rhizome book, we do our best to match a neon green, but there's no neon green Pantone swatch. Like you kind of pick and choose the one you think. So the Rhizome one is actually a lot lighter than the one we chose. And then after we even chose this, once we put on that spot gloss, it dulls the green. And then throughout the book, we're using this recycled paper, which kind of feels like a newsprint. So that also kind of dulled this Pantone green as well. But we did have a few, like anytime you see green in these images, sorry, this camera is fussy. Anytime you see green in these images, we actually added that fifth color. So this is all a fifth swatch of this Pantone green. You can actually see it really nicely here. Like in the actual still, these men it's a much lighter green, but this was a kind of a nice way to add some sort of injection. It also glows in the dark, so when you use the right lighting, it kind of glows. Yeah, so read that essay. He has better examples. While I am on this page though, maybe I'll quickly talk about the AR if people are. So I worked with Tommy Martinez, who's a sound artist, but also a technologist, and we're using the gaming engine Unity. So you can technically scan anything, it just needs to have enough contrast. So typically when you scan things, it looks like a QR code, like this. So this ring technically also scans, and it goes to the Cyberfem site. But we didn't want QR codes all over this book, because when that link dies, then you have all these weird artifacts in the book. So what we instead did was, for all the images with the corresponding video, we submitted 500 by 500 pixel image targets of the highest contrast part of the image away from the gutter, because this really confuses the scanning. So what that allows for is when it scans, it will pull up the corresponding video. So here, you can actually see where the target is, because you can tell that it's attached to this one page. See how it kind of wobbles? So if I were to do this, then it doesn't see it anymore and the video disappears. It also doesn't see color. So images that we thought would have high contrast like this, even if we see this as two halves, the tone is actually very similar across the page. So even though we have a target right here, it never sees it. So what we instead, for those where it didn't register fast enough, is we have key presses. So now if I do this, a video plays, but that's just playing anyway. It's not connected to the book. So even like on all of these text pages, we first put image targets here, but like it just cannot register the difference between this page and this page. So the key presses do well enough, but it does feel different than like the jittery quality of the image targets. That said, right now it's just a local desktop app because bandwidth and time. We're kind of hoping that if enough people see this, then maybe we'll get a grant and we can build a mobile app, but the App Store rules are hard. So eventually we'll get there, but these images the videos are also quite heavy, so it wouldn't run very fast on mobile. But then what's nice about that is we can actually capture really small things, because people can just move it higher to the camera and it might play. And that didn't feel very natural with this fixed camera performance. So yeah, that's kind of a work in progress too.
I have a question versus, looking at the website, the website in a way seems to be such a much more convenient way of having an index. Of course, like you say, it can be continuously updated, all the links are clickable, it's so easy to navigate.
Yeah.
So what role does it play for you now to actually have a book?
Yes.
And what does that physicality of the book, what kind of other experience does this offer for you, for the project?
Yeah.
How has that influenced?
So The easiest answer is because I'm a designer, we love books, but it's also more critical than this because even if we did our best to make certain design and infrastructural decisions for the site to make it future-proof or for as long as possible, generally websites degrade much faster than books. So that's one reason. Another reason is in academic articles, your sources are weighted depending on who you cite and where it's published. So if it's like a peer-reviewed published journal, that's weighted higher than if it's a more ephemeral work like a website or like an art piece or something like this. So this is also a hack to create 703 secondary sources in print for a lot of things that didn't have citations to begin with. And secondary sources are really important because you need these for like Wikipedia or etc. So it's kind of a citational hack as well as a posterity hack.
Yeah, now also, I was just thinking also the physical book actually made you travel now physically.
Yeah,
With the website.
Yeah.
So I guess there's also something in this kind of physical gathering here that is also kind of due to the book.
For sure, yes. Yeah, and I also, when we launched the website, it was in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. I was in upstate New York and we launched it on my porch. And that was it. It was so anticlimactic. So it does feel very special to be able to do this in person.
Yeah.
Cool.
I've got a last question, if I may.
Sure.
I know that you've also spoken about the high interest in the topic a lot before. And now I was wondering if you could say a bit more of why Rhizome approached you with this, or why was it important for them to launch this now?
Well, Rhizome has been like championing digital art, net art since the early 90s, 1996, I believe. So Rhizome and Furtherfield are kind of those two bodies, Rhizome in the US, Furtherfield in the UK. So I think that they've just been very supportive of projects that also champion net art because it's been so ostracized by like the fine art community for so long. I also think beyond this, everyone uses the internet. I specifically write in the intro that this book is not for gender studies or like, I don't know, whatever feminist art canons we want to reference. I really do hope it's a reference guide for people who use the internet, which is a lot of people. 65% of the world are internet users, which in some ways seems low, but it's actually a lot of people. So I think for them, they've just been really pushing forward not only the preservation, but also the development of new digital art and net art. And this was, it kind of fell into both of those categories. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, shall we have, are you okay with 1-2 more questions?
Sure.
Yeah? Are you, everybody else okay? Are you thirsty? 2 more questions?
Hi, thank you very much. I like the analog thing, like the installation very much. Do you think that the project has evolved because you had so many restrictions with the book? Because you had to dive more deeper into it or find different solutions than in the internet?
That's a great question. The book was way harder than the website. And I initially attributed that to just production of books is hard. Like there's so many things people don't see, like what kind of glue you use and the blue lines and whatever. I think because we knew the book wouldn't have this dynamic sorting system, we had to figure out what the structure was. So the architecture of the book was actually really important for us. We kind of joked that like I did the book UX and Laura did the book design. So that was tricky. It also was very much restricted by like logistical rules. So the reason why the book is this size is because it was the most economical page size that we could find beyond like an 8.5 by 11 or A4, right? But because of this size, in the original book, I made a draft catalog like 3 years ago that had all the cross-references in the center with their corresponding image, which we called the indexical spine, and it created like this Talmudic quality. but we just didn't have the room for that with this kind of layout. So a lot of those things had to be modified too. And also the vibrancy that we have online was also limited because of logistical things like budget. So originally we were planning to have, there's 800 images in this book. Only a handful are large. And that's largely because of budgetary constraints. Like we just didn't have the page count to be able to make this. But if I had it my way, I would have made every single image as big as possible and just make the book 1,000 pages or something. We also had to email every single person for these images, which we did not have to do on the website. So God bless Danielle Wu, she sent like 2,000 emails to a lot of decrepit email addresses, like blah, 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 AOL.com or something. But we still were able to get permissions for every single one of these, and only 2 people asked us to pay for them. So that was amazing. So that's also a shame too, because technically if you print it thumbnail size, you don't have to get image permissions, but we have all the permissions, so might as well make it big. And also because of this, half the images are in color for the full bleed, half the images, this is the split actually. This is in color, this is where the black and white pages start. So we actually cut this page in half intentionally. And that's also due to budget. So these on the web, like this side is purple, and you kind of lose a lot of those things. But that said, this is meant to be like a source book and like not very precious. And I hope one day your copies will really look like mine and just get really beat up. So yeah, there was definitely affordances for different mediums. Thanks.
I think there was one question. Yeah? Okay, very last question. Is that fine? Okay. Yeah.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. My question is probably also closing the loop a bit, because you said in the beginning that 1991 has a big meaning, or like, I don't know if I maybe missed it in the talk. But maybe, yeah.
Yeah. That's essentially when the word cyberfeminism was coined. That doesn't mean people were not making feminist digital art earlier. So you see this happening 60s, 70s, and 80s too. We just needed to create some parameters for this because, constraints help with boundaries. So it was coined in 91 by Sadie Plant and VNS Matrix. And that's why the book starts in 91. So it starts with the Cyborg Manifesto, even if this was published in 85, but we just chose the 1991 version, just so it kind of started on time. But this book closes in 2020 because of manuscript rules, but the website kind of goes on in perpetuity. So I think what I'm actually going to do on the site is add more entries from the 70s and 80s, because many of those people were actually emailing me saying like, we didn't have a word for this, but like this falls into that category. And it just feels so arbitrary to say like, nope, it has to be 1991. So I'm going to fix that retroactively. But yeah, it's nice to have mutable rules, because as we talk to people, these parameters change. And I think that's also what helps it live in a way. So eventually it'll expand. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's more questions floating, but maybe we can address you over a drink
Yes.
very casually.
Thank you